before we sort of kick off into the first presentation, so I'd like to just sort of say, and also thank Lovell Later Living and Faithful+Gould for your support, in particular for enabling us to run this session, taking a deep dive into building effective partnerships to deliver at scale and at pace. It very much follows on from an earlier session today, and I really look forward to hearing from all our speakers. We've got a really great lineup for you, so the next slide should share that with you. We're going to be kicking off in a moment with Stephen Whiteman, Director of UK's Modular Methods of Construction. He's the lead at Faithful+Gould. He will be followed by Nina Strangeways, Head of Design and Quality. In fact, he'll be followed by Teresa Snaith, the slight change of order, Customer Experience Director at Lovell Later Living, who in turn will be followed, in fact, they're doing a double act, by Nina Strangeways, Head of Design and Quality Control at Lovell Later Living. And Sue, at no means least, will come back at the end from the regional, who's a Regional Director at Faithful+Gould and long-term support for the LIN. So thanks, Sue, personally, for all your support as well. But I'm going to sort of kick off with Stephen. Stephen, you gave evidence to the HAPPI inquiry. You really helped us shape some of our thinking around how technology plays an important part. We'll cover a little bit more of that, I know, in your session and a lot more tomorrow. But over to you, and thanks very much for helping us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks very much for involving me. It's a great opportunity to be speaking to all the participants today. Hopefully what I'm going to do is give a little bit of context and introduction and frame some of the comments and items that Teresa, Nina and Sue are going to talk about a little bit further down the track, but specifically look at the benefits and the future proofing that's available when you actually start using MMC and the collaboration, the benefits of collaboration around using MMC. And hopefully that'll actually get played out in more detail with some of the direct comments that particularly Nina and Teresa are going to make about some of their experiences in this space. So I think first of all, what I want to do is just set the context. We're going to talk about what is MMC. Why do MMC in housing? What's the point? Why collaborate? How to engage with MMC? And then just a quick look at the future, where the market is currently going, a few market trends, one or two things that are happening. I'm quite fortunate in my role. I get to go around to an awful lot of manufacturing facilities and see what a lot of the marketplace is doing. So it's quite interesting to see how the market is developing, how the market is if you said, setting itself up for success, and perhaps where some of the future directions are coming from. Okay, so what is MMC? And apologies to those of you who might have seen this slide from me before, but I make no bones or no apologies for making this point. I think it's really important to understand that MMC, or modern methods of construction, and it is important that it's a spectrum of solutions. And the key is, it's a process, not a product. The clue is in the wording. It's a method of constructing buildings using the same materials and the similar processes to the ones that we're all familiar with. So you don't have to accept differential materials if you don't want to, although there may be benefits in doing so. This is a process of construction. It's a way of assembling buildings, not a specific product. There are people who are offering products, but that's not how it should be thought of. That's the secondary process. It's a bit like assembling a car. The end product is the car, but the process it may be different between a workshop built car and a production line built car. And this is no different. So it's really important to bear that in mind and have that context right from the start. So why do it? I mean, in housing, it's interesting for me. I've been in this industry for 23, just coming up to 24 years, and always thought that housing was the sort of nirvana of MMC and offsite construction. And only now starting to see this really taking shape. And I think what we have now is an unusual alignment of the stars. We've got a government mandate, so things like the Affordable Building Fund. We've got a reduction in site labour. We've got a reduction in available tradespeople. We've got a huge shortfall in capacity, and I think we all know that the existing marketplace can't deliver that additional capacity that we need. And we're seeing issues around skills and waste and net zero and all of those other things that are really changing the paradigm in construction. So why does MMC fit the bill? So I think the key one there is to look at the benefits. And the key benefits of MMC are all based around the things that it will deliver as part of a project to assist in those project outcomes. So MMC's up to 50% faster in terms of delivery on site. It's up to 10 times safer working in a factory environment than working in a construction environment. It's a predictable place where things happen in the same place every day. You've got proper vehicle segregation and material handling, etc. It's better for sustainability, lower waste, better performance, easier to achieve the level of detailing required to get to net zero. So I think that's going to be an increasingly strong driver for performance in the future. Bearing in mind, as we know from the HousingLIN's work, we're not building the houses for this year or next year, we're building the houses for 30, 40, 50 years down the track. So we need to be thinking about those things now. Quality process systems, it's a process-driven environment where quality is much more achievable and much easier to maintain. You've got reduced disruption, which is significant benefit around community impact. It's largely overlooked in my experience, but when you're talking about developing an estate out where you might have vulnerable users, extensions to existing elderly care facilities, for example, or building adjacent to an existing care facility, the reduced disruption is a real huge benefit. And I think we're going to see some interesting things coming out of the Construction Innovation Hub's value toolkit around that part of it for air quality and a number of other things. Predictability, that's revenue or occupation as developers of housing for multiple occupancy or even private individuals. Certainty of revenue release and certainty of occupation data are absolutely crucial. MMC also offers significant benefits around social value and ED&I. The levelling up agenda, it's going to be interesting to see how Mr. Gove's new department looks at this. Do we need to find a way of allowing local or national benefit for local spend around the levelling up agenda? Digital transformation and BIM, building information modelling, again, easier to achieve within an MMC typology and an MMC approach. And what is always banged on about by government and various bodies, improving labour and material productivity. So that's a quick snapshot of the benefits. There's quite a lot of information available on the web around those kind of things, but that gives you the basic core benefits around using an MMC typology. So why are partnerships and collaboration essential in MMC? Well, I think the first thing is MMC needs to be considered early in the process. You need to do an assessment of the approach. What is going to be the best approach? It's a bit like, you'll do an assessment as whether brick might be the right material to build a house in. It may not, it might be, but it's considered early in the design stages. That needs to be thought of early in an MMC approach. It's very similar. So things like stakeholder analysis and identification of the best fit approach is really crucial. In order to do that, you need collaboration between the various parties, and you need parties with knowledge. So that's a huge reason why collaboration and partnerships work. It's really important to try and use what we call an open protocol design that maintains some flexibility from a client perspective, and also looks to try and achieve some supply chain robustness around different supply chain options. You can still partner, but you don't necessarily want to be partnering in a soulless manner. That might leave you exposed as a client to market maneuvers and people's workloads and other things. I think you've got to think about the long-term benefits. Volume is what the MMC market always bangs on about. They need the volume to commit to the factories, to commit to the work, to the workflow. A factory is an overhead. It exists every single day, regardless of whether there is any activity going around on site or whether there's activity going on in the factory. On average, factories that I've run in the past, they cost about £5,000 a day to run. So the important thing is a long-term commitment and visibility of pipeline. I think it's important to have aligned incentives that allows people to develop relationships in the right way and to actually work for mutual benefit. And you can only have aligned incentives if you have a good partnership arrangement. One of the most successful MMC contracts was SLAM, Single Living Accommodation Modernisation Programme, developed by the department, the MOD or DIO. And that delivered year-on-year benefits to both client and the contractors because it was a shared pain gain mutual benefit contract. So that gives those year-on-year improvements in performance, in financial positions, and all of those things allow the development of net zero benefits and allow to help us achieve our net zero targets. The image on the right-hand side, for those of you who are interested, is a picture of a couple of houses manufactured by Ilka Homes. So those are volumetric units. And it's interesting to see that how they're now working in partnerships with a number of providers, developers, landowners, and RPs. What about design? What are the benefits for design of collaboration? Well, standardization of layout and standardization and focus on the high work areas. Ultimately, modern methods of construction is really going to deliver most value where there is the most value in the building. Large open plan empty spaces with very little in them are not where the benefits are of assembling things off-site. Those real benefits come on those high work areas. But also, if you're talking about collaboration and standardization, then looking at component-based approaches and using a series of smaller components to build up larger elements. So it's very much what's called platform approach. And again, that needs to be done through a collaborative approach. If you're looking at that adaptability and future-proofing, key things around disability provision, future extensions and technical developments, and also non-structural elements. Disability provision, including, for example, the provision to take hoists or knockout sections above doors and windows for hoists and lifts for future provision. Knockout elements of floor cassettes to enable a through floor lift to be put in the future. Absolutely crucial that that design is considered right at the early stage and the collaboration is there. Otherwise, what we tend to get is a low-cost approach, and when we come to make those adaptations in the future, we have to knock the buildings apart. In terms of future extensions, the most common extension on a property in the UK, on a residential property, is to put a single-story ground floor extension off the back of the kitchen living space at the rear of the property. How simple would it be if the steel beam that was to carry that sort of the lintel of the first floor was already included in the modules or the structure when the building was originally built? The incremental cost would be a few £100s in the overall building cost to allow that future adaptability. So those kind of things can be developed through collaboration. The other thing that design collaboration recognizes is designing for the system or to the system, not against it, and trusting the specialist. The specialist has the knowledge about how their system works. They've developed that system and they've built that system across multiple typologies with multiple clients in multiple environments. And there needs to be a level of trust with the specialist who's providing that service. And that only really comes from collaboration. A couple of other considerations around the collaboration issue, things like procurement, how to procure, the use of frameworks, the contractual approach, and that long-term commitment again. It's important that there's recognition of those benefits and how that might be developed out for mutual benefit. Finance is one of those issues that is absolutely crucial. There needs to be an understanding around things like the cash flow profile and the payment terms. And again, collaborative approaches tend to recognize that better. They tend to allow more security for both parties in those relationships around things like valuations and insurances of goods. So it's really crucial that they are developed as part of a collaborative framework approach. And the understanding of the program, things like the decision-making processes and the certainty of the site works. Quite often, what we see with collaboration on these kind of projects is that the MMC provider is only providing a part of the building or an element, the structure perhaps, and they're working alongside other partners. So it's absolutely crucial that everybody understands where their relative elements sit and the certainty of the site works around those programs and how that's going to be paid for and developed through the process. So it's an absolutely crucial issue to have that level of collaboration. If there's no collaboration, a very contractual, adversarial approach, in my experience, will not deliver the benefits that are required or can accrue from this process. Just wanted to touch on a couple of other things before I pass on to Teresa and Nina. We are involved in the Homes England study, which to put it in context is over 1,500 homes, 8 sites and 6 providers with a variety of partners, including University College London and the BRE, Atkins and F&G. And we're looking at 15 key themes: pace, cost, labour, planning, pre-manufactured value, PMV, for those of you who are not aware of that term, and things like safety, waste, logistics, etc. We're in the first, I think it's the first year, so the first reports will be coming out soon. There have been a number of challenges on this process, particularly around the lack of common data sets and the variable data quality. There's also a wide variety of projects and sites, and there are external influences coming into play. So it's been an interesting process, but keep your eyes open for those reports starting to come out, I think, early next year. I think that's an interesting part of how collaboration, even between bodies that wouldn't normally collaborate, to try and drive the industry dynamic and the industry approach. So, to talk a little bit about how to engage with MMC and DFMA, RIBA recently released a new DFMA MMC overlay to the RIBA plan of work. I recommend reading that to any clients who want to try and engage with DFMA and MMC. And what it recognizes is this MMC assessment process that I mentioned earlier. To do that as early as possible, stage 0, and to continually review it through stages 1 to 4. What that helps is to understand what is the right approach and what isn't the right approach, probably more importantly. In my experience, it's more important to know when not to do a particular form of MMC than to just blindly assume that that's the right way to go. And there needs to be that level of trust and faith in the parties that are involved. It talks about an open protocol to allow flexibility as the design develops, and that can be refined through the later stages. It's effectively a funnel. So you start out with a wide number of approaches, and as you refine your project through the RIBA stages 2, 3, 4, you start to refine that approach down to the point where you actually can then focus in on the most beneficial approach for your project, which may be a traditional on-site approach at the end of the day. I recently advised a client that the best way to build their building was going to be using traditional materials in situ, not an MMC approach. It wasn't going to deliver value for them. And it's important, I think, that the industry is open enough to turn around to clients and say when it's not the right approach. The other area that it recommends is taking specialist MMC advice. That's through people with design and delivery knowledge, and importantly, people with an agnostic approach. Unfortunately, suppliers will tend to have a bias towards their particular approach. So if you asked a volumetric manufacturer, they'll probably tell you volumetric is the only way to build. What we're seeing an increasing growth in is independent MMC advice, people like myself in other organizations as well as F&G, who can assist you with that agnostic approach about assessing the options and assessing the needs. I think it's a really interesting development in the industry that we've seen only mostly sort of arising in the last couple of years. So just a quick bit on where the future is and what we're seeing happening in the space. The technology in MMC manufacturing is moving quite quickly at the moment. We're starting to see quite a lot of interesting stuff around manufacturing processes. We're seeing things like live shop floor data terminals, QR code, work logging, RFID tagging, and process-based equipment such as this panel assembly jig that's been implemented at Ilka Homes. We're seeing automatic cutting and assembly and sub-assemblies happening as well. That's a picture of Lang O'Rourke's Explore factory in near Worksop in North Nottinghamshire. And those panels are actually manufactured almost entirely by robot. They're placed on the molds by robot. The batching of the concrete comes over, delivered by robot, and it's poured in, and then the tables go and move themselves off to the kiln to be cured, all done automatically. Huge level of automation and really worth seeing. But we're also starting to see this third-party supply chain sub-assembly process come in, much as the car manufacturers do. So looking at something like a plumbing assembly, what we're seeing now is that there are manufacturers out there offering sub-assembled plumbing components. So effectively the core elements of a bathroom wall, soil stack, waste, toilet cistern, hot cold feeds, and sink wastes being supplied as a pre-manufactured panel, all laid to falls, all properly tested, all the compression fittings fitted in the factory, and offering a significant benefit for house builders both on-site and off-site in streamlining their processes. And that sub-assembly idea is starting to move its way into the off-site manufacturing process, and I think is the real start of the development of those car-style manufacturing processes. However, there is a challenge that I think we as an industry have to pick up. We have to look at things like robotics and 3D printed and data capture and workflows. But I think we also need to think about our materials. We need to think about manufacturing-based materials, dry finishes, dry jointing. I stayed in a hotel recently. There wasn't a single wet trade finish in there. It was all board finishes, pre-printed, graphicked, logoed. Nothing unacceptable about it at all as a space. But if we really want to move forward, I think we've got to start thinking about some of these construction materials, what they are, how we use them, how we assemble them, and going towards a manufactured-based materials. And things like plug and play connections and the use of all electric heating systems, I think is going to be a significant area in the next few years. So have we been here before? Well, we have to an extent, but I would argue it's different this time. The prefabs wildly sort of vilified from the 1960s were only supposed to last 10 to 15 years, and some of them are still there. I think this time it is different. I think this time we've got more robustness in the supply chain. I think we've got more robustness in design, assembly processes, quality control, and the whole gamut of advisors and checks and balances around the process. So I think it is different. I think it's a different time, and I think it's going to be an interesting place to be sitting over the next few years. That's everything from me. If you want to get in touch with me, please contact me direct. And I'd now like to pass over to Teresa and Nina to give you the view from the client side.
Thank you, Stephen, for such a real comprehensive and illuminating presentation. I know that people are already starting to post some questions in. Please do have a look, and we'll answer those when we come to it. So, Teresa, welcome, and again, really looking forward to hearing about your work, and it builds on the collaborative approach that Stephen's already outlined. So, over to you.
Thank you. I have to apologise in the first instance because we're having a few technical issues, so I'm going to have to rely on technical support at the HousingLIN's end and keep saying next when I want to move to the next slide, so apologies for that. Okay, so I suppose next, please. I'm going to set the scene a little bit today before I hand over to Nina. In regards to working in partnership, we've been hearing quite a lot in the news recently about the care crisis that we're facing in the UK, the government's investment in connecting housing, health and care. And I really wanted to just talk a little bit about partnerships. So I've been in the industry of supported housing for some 30 years, seen a lot of changes, and approached new build and operational development in a number of ways. And for me, the one that's always worked the best and has had the best outcomes is the ones where we've worked in partnership across a plethora of different stakeholders to a project or projects. And certainly given, you know, the need for delivering new homes and the right homes to our sector, partnerships is probably one of the best ways forward to make sure that we deliver at speed and at pace. We're obviously keen that we should be looking at this through the eyes of the customer, that we're delivering homes, new homes that people want to move to, want to live in, and people can downsize, right size to in the future. And it's about living well and independently for longer. What we want to do is deliver communities within communities and not silos, which quite often has happened in the past. Next, please. So one of the things that we've done a lot of research and work on is how we use strategic partnerships to deliver a wider housing choice. Next. So some of the things that we've been reviewing and looking at is how we deliver lifelong homes, whether these be for sale or in partnership for rent, whether it's extra care housing with care, working with local authorities and RPs, or whether it's a registered specialist care home that we've looked to deliver with local authorities and the private sector. We have an ageing populations with greater aspirations than they had a number of years ago. People talk about giving a person-centred approach. So again, using the customer feedback to deliver rather than just assuming that we know what people want, and empowering our customers to actually shape their later lives. So telling us what they want, how they want it, and what they want to see delivered. Certainly, almost being at that age myself, you know, I want to be able to choose where I live and how I spend my retirement part of my life going forward. So what would that be? How would I choose to live? And what choices would I want to be able to make when I'm deciding what my, you know, what my home will look like for the latter years of my life? So Nina and I have been doing a lot of work as part of Lovell Later Living, looking at our design, our quality of design, our specifications, our briefs. This has included things like quality control in fire and M&E delivery. We've looked at how we see it through the eyes of the customer and engaged with others to help us do that. We haven't assumed that we know what everybody wants. We've actually asked the question and looked at how then our specifications and brief will deliver to that. So in terms of what next, next please. We've looked at delivering a lifelong home. So a home that can be easily adapted, is flexible, has longevity. Looking at the government agendas around things like greener homes, sustainability, use of you know, carbon zero products. We've also looked at smart homes, and this is a particular area that I'm very interested in. I think Nina and I have spent quite some time looking at the different options that are out there to us and working with different associates and partners as to how that can be delivered. So we've looked at smart technology, we've looked at you know, how we link into health through assistive technology and smart homes. We've been working with a host of partners. So in terms of local authorities, we've done a lot of work presently with Norfolk County Council, Hampshire County Council. We've got a number of schemes on the table with Leeds. We've looked at what the smart technologies might be with some of our associates like Lux, Evron. We've obviously looked at the tungsten and Napello offers. So there's been an awful lot of work ongoing over the last few months, and I know that we've all had our eye on the HAPPI solutions that have been on the table and what that's going to deliver in the future. And again, working with a number of partners on how we can feed into that. I think connectivity with health services, health and care services, is going to be very important for people that want to buy into a home and want to ensure that they can stay there as long as possible. We've also been talking to partners about independent community hubs. So rather than having a hub as part of a larger project that is part of the main development, is actually having a separate community hub that will deliver the same services but connects more with the wider community and delivering services and facilities to that community. So next. So one of the biggest part of the work that we've been doing recently is with a company called VREP, which is Virtual Reality Empathy Platform. And these particular associates are doing, looking at how we can see through the eyes of somebody with dementia what the design of a building actually looks like. And it's quite interesting, because looking through the eye of somebody living with dementia is interesting. They don't see what we see. And actually, when we're looking at designing our products, it's quite important to have the eyes, ears and heart of somebody else and how they're living their life. And Nina will talk a little bit more about some of the solutions that we have been looking at, but this particular one has been quite important to us because it's given us an insight of what other people are seeing. Sorry, Jeremy, can we just go on to the next two? Oh, back, thank you. So we took a digital platform and we all had a go at looking through that at some of the designs and viewing what that meant to somebody living in one of our homes, whether that's, you know, one of our retirement for sale homes, extra care, or a registered specialist home. And we're doing a lot of work with them at the moment to actually download our designs into this platform so that we can better understand what it is that we need to do to make somebody's home and somebody's living environment a much easier place to live. So I'm going to pass over to Nina now, that's going to go into this in a little bit more detail in terms of who we've been working with and some of the options that we've been exploring. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Nina Strangeways. So today I'm going to be talking about innovation in construction and how we've been putting this in good effect to generate new happy homes and community. Next slides, please. First, I want to talk about the market, some of the market challenges, and I think Stephen and both Teresa mentioned, you know, the challenges that we have. We have a housing crisis for home not fit for purpose for older age, and really the housing crisis is not just about young people starting out. Next slides, please. Next slide, thank you. So looking at some of the market challenges that we've got at the moment. So in the face of a growing crisis for health and social care, we really can't afford to just ticking some boxes and you know, when the clock is ticking really. So we need to be raising our standards. The built environment is a big culprit of carbon emission. So really the question today that, you know, I'm going to talk through is how do we overcome some of these challenges and how do we push forward? And one of the big answers is through partnership. Working through partnership with others. Next slide, please. So working in partnership to raise the standard. We all know, you know, the cost implication of reinventing the wheel, but that doesn't mean that standardization doesn't mean that we can't actually, we're unable to raise those standards by working in partnership. Next slide, please. So we're currently at Lovell Later Living, we're working partnership to raise those standards. So we're taking a very much so a customer-centered approach to drive efficiency and accelerate delivery to respond to the urgency of the market. We're looking at standardization of the right product and the right application for our customers. So first, you know, the most important thing for us, you know, and it should be at the forefront of everyone else's business plan really, is investing in quality without greed, which is really important to us, putting our customer first, building sustainable homes that support a circular economy, you know, getting rid of the throwaway culture that we currently live into. While growing and adapting with our customers' ask, you know, as and when it changes. So really for us, it's about building, you know, for longevity, which is really important, and doing so in partnership. Next slide, please. So we've been looking at modern method of construction. We've been working in partnership with associate and partners to drive innovative approach. So we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment with Saint-Gobain Interact team to deliver at scale and at pace. We've engaged with them quite early on, so we've developed an extra care and a care home model, if you will, so that we can see how we can kind of deliver that at scale and at pace. Next slides, please. We've also been working with Procurement, looking at sustainable method of construction. If you can, next slide, please. And looking how you know, we can look at low carbon emissions solution to support the driver's zero carbon emission. Next point. If you just get to all the next points, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as well as looking at, you know, the benefits of modern method of construction, you know, in terms of building faster, quality, and also minimizing construction and carbon footprint, we've also looked at off-site building solution, and I think Steve mentioned it as well. And we've been looking at increasing the pre-manufacturing value through pods and pre-assemble M&E elements in the extra care and the care home, to again drive that faster delivery for our extra care and care home. Next slide, please. We've also been working in partnership with a number of partners to look at renewable technologies and investing in the technical viability of those different sources of energy. So we're currently doing quite a significant work with the like of Mitsubishi with the air source heat pump, and the Kenta Group with ground source heat pump and infrared heating, and assessing those different sources of energy and which one are fit for purpose for our customers, or should I say which ones, it's not just the one system, and looking at how we can reduce operational energy, but also encourage our customers to live a green life. Next, please. One exercise that Teresa and I am quite excited about, and we spend quite a bit of time, we're working in partnership with Gould and I at the moment to develop a smart home solution, digital platform for our product. Next slide, please. So we've been looking at how the smart solution, and looking at how we can create a simple and secure interactive communication platforms acting as a buddy system, basically. Next slide, please. We're also looking at, next slide, thank you, at health, how this can benefit the health of our customers by creating a digital and virtual platform for our customers, but also for their home. Next slides, please. And how this digital platform can be used as a property management platform, you know, from your handyman, your service, your repair, your boilers, how this smart home solution can detect issues with the home before those issues actually occurs, and it can be notified. Next slide, please. So in terms of the smart solution, it's about longevity in your home, basically. That's what we're looking at. So we're working with our customers and partners to try and deliver that, looking at cost effective. It has to be a user-friendly system, just to allow our customer to live a healthy and independent, socially rewarding life, really. Next slides. Thank you. And really, to sum up my presentation, is talking about how important partnership is, and for us to be able to deliver, you know, our scheme, looking at how we can work with the customers, but with the partners, to look at, you know, modern method of construction, renewable technology, smart technology, inclusive, accessible product, and looking at how that can become our raised new standards for what we're delivering. And to finish off, really, for me, is just to say that, you know, as a sector, we need to respond to this together, as together we will be more effective. I'll pass on to Teresa just for a bit of a conclusion.
Thank you, Nina. Yes, I think really what I wanted to conclude with was to say that, you know, partnerships are important, whether that be local authorities, providers, operators, or the associates that we're working with, to find the best option and the best solutions to make our homes have the longevity and the quality that are expected of them. You know, if we're going to work at speed and at pace, then I think Stephen mentioned about people being committed, and I think again this is important, a commitment from all partners, all stakeholders to projects, and a commitment to numbers rather than trying to pick off one project at a time will be important to move these things forward quickly. So that's that. Thank you, and thank you for those of you that joined us today for our presentation.
Oh, well, thank you both of you as well. Really great presentation, followed on really neatly on from Stephen's. And I was just struck by both the comments you've made around that partnership working, both in terms of systems and processes, but also the people elements, whether it's with health and social care, local authorities and others. And last week, the Department of Health and Social Care published its white paper, which talked about wanting to boost the supply of supported housing and specialist housing. And I think it's only going to be able to be delivered if those partnerships are really embedded right from the outset. So I think you've demonstrated those by citing several localities that you are already engaged with. I'm going to draw this one to a close and hand over to Sue. Sue, thanks ever so for joining us this afternoon. And the final speaker is Susan Rugg, from who's the Regional Director at Faithful+Gould, and will top and tail the F&G contribution. So over to you, Sue. Sue, we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
For a moment, I thought my system had crashed. I don't know whether.
Does that work?
Oh, that's brilliant.
Ah. Yeah. Oh, you missed the best bit there.
Oh, please, but you'll have to repeat it then. Well, welcome, Sue.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. I think what I'm hoping to plan to do is pull together both the bit from F&G and what Stephen was talking about, his expertise in the MMC market, and also what both Nina and Teresa were discussing about how they've developed their expertise within the extra care market as a contractor. But one thing I get asked a lot, having worked in the supported housing market for over 20 plus years, is actually, how do we procure these people? How do we engage with these people? How do we engage with people who understand the market? So hopefully I can talk a little bit about that today in the presentation. So just to quickly run through the agenda, I'm going to look at how we can engage, a little bit about compliance, that always seems a bit of a minefield, timelines and the ROBA standards and how they link in with what we're currently doing. Consultants and contractors are going to talk about frameworks, what is out there and how we can engage properly and with the right compliance. And finally, the benefits and next steps. So how do we engage? I'm sure we've all heard these words a million times. We've heard about strategic partnerships, local frameworks, national frameworks, mini competitions, DPS, restricted procurement, direct and open procurement. The list goes on and on. It all seems like a bit of a minefield. I'm not an expert in procurement, but what I do have a passion for is extra care and integrated retirement communities, and making sure that my clients, our end users, actually work with people who understand the market and understand how to deliver these buildings efficiently and quickly. And we all know that there is a shortage of these type of homes, and that is one thing that we need to deliver. And we need to be looking at the future and how we deliver that. One thing I will say is there is no right or wrong way to procure. You might go through a framework, you might look at a strategic partnership, but it's about making sure that you're engaging with the right people who understand your project and will be able to deliver at pace for you. Compliance. Well, you know, we all voted, we are now out of the EU. We don't have to follow the EU regulations in how we procure. But as of the 1st of January 2021, We are no longer needing to follow those procurement regulations out, so we don't need to do the OSU tenders, but we do need to have a new e-tendering portal, and that is the Find a Tender service for us. So that will be instead of OSU. I'm sure you've all heard about it this year. We still have a similar system, so we still have procurement thresholds. So if your project or consultant service is over a certain threshold, you need to actually use the Find a Tender service. The service itself, again, we still have NUTS codes, exactly the same as OSU. The NUTS codes are split across geographical regions of the country. You need to make sure that you've ticked the right box, whether it's going to be a national or local framework. The principles of procurement remain the same. So we are still looking at transparency, integrity, non-discrimination and a fair treatment of suppliers. But one thing that has been added in as a result of the Find a Tender service is value for money, public good and efficiency. That is something that we need to be aiming for, as there is more focus on both the environmental, economic and social side of public procurement. And we are actually being encouraged not to see the lowest bid win. So it's about getting the value out of that bidding process. And the process also still has the CPV codes. I'm sure a lot of you have been familiar with these, you know, from making sure that we pick the right code to what services we offer. The diagram here is just showing some of the common consultancy services, but again, it's making sure that we pick the right ones at the beginning. That's a little bit about compliance. But how does this all fit in to making sure we get the right people on at the right time? Stephen talked about it briefly, and the RIBA have done a DFMA overlay to make sure that we are making sure that we engage at the right time. And they've done some quite handy charts within there, and they're wanting to try and compare it back to what you would be doing if you were doing a traditional or design stage, design and build project, and making sure that you're engaging with people at the right time throughout the stages. And they've split it all down into the MMC categories so that you know what you're doing. It's a second issue guide. I'm sure there might end up being a third issue eventually as the technology moves forwards. But one thing it is trying to acknowledge is the successful implementation lies with the collaboration of everyone. And that is between the traditional disciplines as well as the hybrid solutions. We need to make sure that we are always thinking outside the box, but making sure that we're talking to everyone at the same time. One thing that is saying is that you engage early. Make sure you do engage early. It is a technical process. And one thing that they need to make sure that they're doing is getting the right people on at the right time. They have actually put in there a diagram of when to engage with people. One thing they have talked about is making sure that you get an MMC advisor. Stephen mentioned that a lot of consultants now are engaging with this process and having advisors so that people know what system and to ask the right questions at the right time, and then suggesting that it goes on to engage with both architects, engineers and the contractor, and also the manufacturer in the case of MMC. This diagram here is quite handy. It splits it down into the RIBA stages, and it's highlighting the blue is the earliest to latest for appointment. The green is the typical duration of the appointment. The pink is indicating when you should actually go in for a planning application, and the yellow is a typical design freeze. As you can see, depending on what type of MMC category you're looking at, they do change, but it's always a good reference tool. For the majority of the MMC categories, it's about engaging early, as we've talked about. Moving on now to procurement and consultants. I'm just going to highlight a few frameworks that can assist in procurement of consultants. Obviously, I'm aware that I've picked a few of the national frameworks. There are local frameworks out there as well. And there are a lot more national ones, but I could be here talking about it all day. For me, this is just picking out some of the major ones that are currently in the market. Starting with Pagabo, it's a professional services framework, and it has 19 lots. Those lots go from lot 1, which is a multidisciplinary service, which Faithful+Gould are appointed under, to all the way through to architecture, engineering, landscape and design, M&E. It covers all your consultant services. I think some of the differences there on this one, you can directly appoint under lot 1, and there is mini competitions under the other lots. Appointment, further competition with possibility of direct award, like I've discussed. Crown Commercial Services. This is a construction professional services framework. Again, lots of different lots on there. Lots 1 and 2, again, are multidisciplinary and project management, probably some of the most important ones as you go through. It's a national coverage, and again, it covers both direct and mini competition for award. And considering that we are talking about supported housing and extra care properties, I have included the NHS Shared Business Services Framework. Again, it is a national framework, and it covers all your key services for what you're needing to do and to build an extra care development. Again, it has both direct and mini competition awards. Just going to talk briefly about contractors frameworks. The 3 that I've picked out here are specifically related to modular MMC market. Again, there are lots of frameworks out there and it can be a bit of a minefield, but I thought I'd pick out some of the newest ones that are out there that people might not have heard of. So we have the LHC Offsite Construction and New Homes Framework. Terminology on this framework is slightly different. It is split into work streams instead of lots, with those work streams 1 and 2 looking at modular buildings, and then further split down into project value bands. There are lots of different manufacturers on here, so it might not be the names that you would expect to see, but it is looking at MMC in probably its purest form. The modular cylinder, the CCS, Modular Building Solutions Framework. There are 24 suppliers on this framework, and again across 7 lots. Lots 1 to 4 focus on education and healthcare, where lots 5 to 7 are on other sectors from housing, defence, commercial and retail. What is good about this is you can use different forms of construction contracts from JCT, NEC, PPC 2000. So it gives you the flexibility to define what project or construction contract you want to use in the future. And then finally, I just wanted to point out the Fusion 21 project. It's a modular building framework, and again, it's a national framework. It's split into 5 lots, and 1 to 4 are based in construction values, where lot 5 is based on the type of building, and there is lot 5B, which is relating to health. There are more frameworks in the pipeline, so don't be distracted or dictated by the framework that you are currently looking at. Just think about what total solution you're wanting, and make sure, or if you have any confusion, speak to the framework managers or speak to consultants or contractors and see actually what they are looking at and what frameworks they are on. Finally, I'm just going to talk completely off about frameworks and go more onto a strategic partnership. We're aware that in the UK, there is a shortage of bed spaces for extra care integrated retirement communities in the UK. We need to build more, we need to build faster, we need to build good quality. What was discussed by Teresa about building relationships, building that strategic relationship with both consultants and contractors can be achieved. We've heard how those partnerships with local authorities and housing associations are aligning with their aims to deliver. So what I'm trying to say is actually there are frameworks out there, but also you should think about how that strategic relationship can be built, and that might be being outside of a framework situation. Speak to the people who are understanding the market and that's both from a consultant and contractor point of view. So what are the benefits? I picked out here key performance indicators. From a framework point of view and from a strategic partner point of view, we need to look at how we can improve that. Seeing the improvement is really important. So we all look at actually our key performance indicators, and that might be on cost, quality and time, and also about consumer and customer satisfaction. So that is, you know, from a client point of view, but also about the end user point of view. And finally, social value and how we deliver. You know, social value has often been talked about for a number of years, and that is where we look at how many apprenticeships, how we safeguard jobs, etc. But that doesn't sometimes fit in how we're going to do MMC. So we've got to look outside the box in terms of how we deliver social value for MMC. That focus can be on the whole life value in terms of the long-term social, economic and environmental impacts of during the operational phase, not just of the construction phase. I'm sure we can talk about that in more detail in the future. The RIBA again has built in the social value in built environment. They have included diagrams within the work streams about how we can integrate that throughout all of the stages of the RIBA. So our next steps. For me, look at the sector focus, we have some really strong consultants and contractors who are delivering extra care and have experience with both the MMC and the technology that we are looking at delivering. We need to look at the MMC knowledge and the guidance papers that are out there and how we can build and continue to build strategic partnerships, both with frameworks and outside frameworks. And finally, what are we going to do, both Faithful+Gould and Lovell's, in the future? We've committed with Jeremy for the HousingLIN to produce some happy hours to do a bit of a more deep dive into what we've talked about today, considering that we've got limited time, but hopefully that's covered quite a lot of the process at the moment. I'm going to hand back to Jeremy.
Susan, that's brilliant, and thanks ever so. And we very much look forward to developing the spring programme of happy hours with you. And thanks for drawing attention to that. But I thought what all four of you have shared with us this lunchtime builds on quite neatly from this morning's session. And if any of you were joining us, you will have noticed that issues around social and value, citizen engagement, partnership working were still touched on there as well. So the fact that you've sort of been able to sort of both identify those total solutions that you mentioned, Sue, but also point to frameworks, modern methods of construction, looking at where the contractor, the consultant, and and even commissioners and operators, how they all fit into this really important virtuous circle is something that I think is, in a sense, part of a broader agenda of what Toby Lloyd talked about this morning, which is about no places left behind. So part of that levelling up agenda. So we're all on that sort of better platform. So with that in mind, we've got several questions and a couple of sort of comments in the chat box that have been posted. And we've got, I think, about 10 minutes or so to deal with these. I know that a few have been answered already, and we'll come back to those. But one of the first points that have been raised and was very much around thinking, I think, Stephen, it's a point that you raised in one of your slides around the adaptability of the built form, both from the outset, but also just thinking about some of those sub-assembly points that you drew attention to as well. And Sheila McIntosh, who's very well known in the sector around adaptations. In fact, she's speaking at one of our sessions later this week on looking at contemporary adaptations. She asked how many MMC companies are actually including adaptability in their designs. Are all companies designing for later life including adaptable designs?
Just unmute myself first before I go rumbling on.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. I think it's interesting. The normal approach is that they will not include adaptability unless it's something that they're asked for, because most organizations are responding to a specific brief. and they don't necessarily see the need to introduce what they might perceive as being some additional cost in the overall profile. I think, to pick up Sue's point, the interesting part here is if people start thinking about things rather than the immediate direct capital cost of the first build, and think about the value proposition. I am aware of one MMC organisation with a standardised design who have said they can't do a future adaptability for a lift at this moment in time. Whether they choose to change that approach in the future, I don't know. I won't mention them because it's not fair, but there are some who do it, and I've certainly been involved in organisations who do it in the past. I don't think that it's something that's being included as standard. My call out to the industry would be to consider it, because I don't believe it is a hugely expensive process. And I think also architects and clients should consider it, because if it is designed in, framing out a floor aperture by inserting a trimming joist and a couple of subsidiary joists to trim out a floor aperture for a lift in the future, you are talking about a couple of sections of steel at, you know, a few pounds a linear meter for a few pieces of steel. It really is that small. And the adaptability of that, plus the other thing is the location is already sorted as well. You know, you've got that designed location right at the outset, and it might mean that you don't need to think about the staircase quite so much. You might have to have a more adaptable staircase design that doesn't require provision for future stair lift. So you could even be able to do slightly more innovative approaches elsewhere. Plus a 3-story structure, you could provide adaptability right through a 3-story structure as well. I think the other part about it, and it's actually another question that came on from an anonymous attendee on the same one. If you don't, I was going to, I'll drop onto that if you wouldn't mind, because I've got the question up in front of me. The question that was asked was, would the adaptation for hoists be both bathroom and bedroom ceilings or entire floor plans? Where I have seen it done before was principally in bedrooms and en-suites. So where you had a bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, and it was effectively plating out the ceiling joists to carry a future lift or hoist that would go from the nominal bed position, because usually there's only one location in most of these rooms for a bed, through to the ensuite bathroom. What that also included was knockout panels above the door of the entrance to the bathroom, so that could be removed for the hoist to run through. But that was specifically designed as a future adapted bedroom. The materials, it's the same stuff you would put in to adapt any structure. So it would be a steel plate or a spreader plate of some sort to carry those kind of loads. What's difficult is to know how far you go, because you could, trying to design for every outcome is potentially excessive. But I believe there are simple things that could be achieved, and simple loads that could be allocated. I know people are getting heavier. We have bariatric issues these days, but there must be something that we can put in as a basic design provision, which wouldn't be expensive at the design stage.
Thanks for that. And I know that certainly from a design perspective, I visited Portloop fairly recently, which won the Healthy Homes Award of this year's National Housing Design Awards. And talking to the site foreman, he very much felt that if information was supplied early enough, properties could comply completely with accessibility right at the outset, which actually would ease some of the cost of future adaptations, albeit there may be some specific bespoke ones which might be needed for any future householder. So again, I think that sort of echoes what you're hinting at.
I think it's also important to understand it's one of the problems or the challenges that I often get thrown at me is, if we use an MMC typology, am I going to have to go back to the manufacturer in order to adapt this property, or to make any changes, or even repair it? But it goes back to one of my earlier points, which is we're not talking about different materials here, we're just talking about different processes. So the reality is that an MMC property can be adapted in the future, but in the same way as if it was built of brick or block and you wanted to knock a hole in the wall, you'd need to put a lintel in and engage an engineer. You would need to do exactly the same processes if it hadn't been thought of. My call out to the industry is, if it's thought of and we build in these simple things, they will add minute costs at this stage and provide such a level of adaptability for the future. I think it will be a real step change.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that's part of our agenda, both with HAPPI, but also some of the work that HousingLIN is doing with the Home Coalition, which is really about trying to create a better, improved quality standard around Part M of the building regs. Look, there's a question here from another anonymous contributor for later living, and it's really about the role of community hubs. Will there be a central community health centre built for later living residential areas? Can Nina or Teresa, can you sort of share any insights on that?
Yes, certainly. we've been working with a hub provider. So basically this is initially in line with the developments that we're looking at for open market sale. And we would build them, I suppose, on the footprint of a bungalow, a couple of bungalows, a space that they could deliver services from. So they provide care services, they can run a cafe, restaurant from there, engage with pharmacists and libraries to have space in that hub. So a little bit like the extra care or specialist care hubs we're discussing, is that they will provide very similar amenities. So somewhere people from the community, our community and the wider community could go and engage, have services delivered, could go and use their amenities, whether that be a cafe, restaurant, library, pharmacy, if there's space in there, you know, bring other partners in to deliver services like chiropody. So this particular provider is already doing it within extra care type settings, but we're actually talking to them about delivering them on our open market sale product, and then you know, opening those amenities out to the wider community.
And it sounds to me that that's not just about meeting a particular need, it's actually creating a new narrative around wellness and meeting people's lifestyle aspiration. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, I would say so. And I think in my presentation, I mentioned about, you know, building communities within communities. What we don't want is that we have a gated community that just deals with our customers, but actually opens it up so people, you know, not suffering from isolation. I mean, COVID has been a real example of how hard it has been for some communities and for some older people. So yeah, it's all about not just physical wellness, but mental wellness as well. And, you know, engaging with people that are out in the community, maybe living with dementia, that can benefit from some of the services and befriending that those communities can provide.
And Nina, I think I saw in one of the questions something about sustainability and sustainable solutions. I'm not sure if you answered it, but you mentioned it. You mentioned it in your presentation. Could you, if you did, could you just reflect on what you said, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the question was about the use of low carbon masonry solution, which is Procurement, whether it's got the life expectancy to compare to a concrete block. And I think in my presentation, I did go through some of the benefit of Procurement, and the life expectancy is 150 years, but not just that, it can be recycled. And we all know concrete block is not as easy in a sense. So yeah, the product is a natural material product again, which, you know, when you look at a concrete block, it's not a natural product. So it's all about reducing those construction carbon emission, basically. And I think it's fair to say there's a number of house builders out there that uses Procurement as a standard product, because it is also classified as a modern method of construction because of the way it's built. The process that you build it, you take your brick out of your critical path, you can go up to 3-story, and you know, for us, for our extra care home, they're predominantly 3 stories, so you get to your watertight level much sooner. Again, it's about delivering faster.
Well, thanks for that. And I suppose the other thing which we haven't really touched on, but I mean, we'll, you know, I think Teresa, you mentioned, you know, some of the schemes we've had for 10, 15 years, you know, thinking about that future proofing and what potential retrofit as well. If we can simplify the processes to make sure that we can make the, you know, we can deal with the snagging, yes, but then we can also deal with major retrofits or redesigning. I think that will also bring in care efficiencies both into the system. I don't know whether Susan's got any final comments on that, or Stephen.
I think I'm going to pass over to Stephen if he's got any. But if, I mean, for me, you know, we look at several types of buildings out there. We are working with several providers at the moment, looking at how those spaces can be adapted and used more efficiently. And, you know, the different MMC models that we can put into there, and how we can look at converting empty spaces into more apartments. But again, it's about taking each of those projects as an isolated project at the moment, and investigating what needs to be done, and what can be done, whether some of those buildings are empty, some of them are lived in. You know, we've got to adapt around everything. But, you know, that is something that we are working with a lot of providers at the moment with.
Just on the back of that, Sue, Sue will know that whenever we work with partners that are getting HousingLIN funding, we have to think about exit strategies. So we think about how buildings can be adapted for people's needs. And I mean, you know, flexibility, longevity, adaptations, all of that plays an important part in the discussion that we're having with partners, but also about having a plan B. What's the exit strategy if these buildings are no longer suitable for the original purpose that they're built for?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think also,
Steve,
sorry,
do you have a
Jeremy,
final word?
Jeremy, just to say that, I mean, the other thing that I think is important to think about, to pick up on Sue's point, if you're talking about existing stock that you want to adapt, looking at using different forms of MMC, and we didn't actually talk about it in detail, although it was on one of Sue's slides if people want to pick it up. There are 7 categories of MMC. The non-structural element of offsite construction is called category 5, and that tends to work around things like mechanical and electrical installation materials and components. Bathroom pods, for example, are a good example of category 5 solutions. And in terms of retrofit, the use of MMC to retrofit buildings with minimal disruption to occupants is I think, not wildly overlooked, but is not being considered to the level that it probably could be in terms of its deliveries, particularly when you think about noise, you think about disruption of construction workers on site, you think about the use of, you know, just transport and all those other kind of sustainable questions, but really about if you could go into someone's apartment and refit their bathroom by the use of the kind of those sub-assemblies that I talked about, where you basically just take it out, you go in and you screw a full new drainage set to the wall in effectively 15 or 20 minutes, rather than having to have a plumber in there for a day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever it might take. And you know that that plumbing set's already been pre-tested. I think that's a really interesting proposition. And we're talking to the GPA at the moment about some of their net zero stuff and upgrading their estate for net zero. And at one level, it's as simple as replacing all the lamps with LEDs, but at the other level, it's about changing complete M&E systems in buildings that are occupied for new energy efficient MVHR systems or whatever. And I think that's an area where you're going to see some interesting growth and interesting benefits. And again, thinking about the occupied estate with vulnerable people, that minimal disruption is a really key issue. So I think it's something that's going to be a really interesting future development, and a call out to the industry to start perhaps pushing their credentials in that area. There was one other thing I was just going to close out with, Jeremy, which was a quick note on one of Sue's points. NHS SBS framework, the consultant framework, is just about to be rebid, interestingly. It's due out, I think, in January next year, Sue, isn't it? There was a delay and it's now coming back out in January next year. For the first time, they're actually going to have an MMC consultant lot on that framework. So I think there's actually 16 lots on that framework overall, but it's the first time I've seen a specific MMC consultant lot on a framework, which is actually playing into the whole point about the DFMA MMC overlay and the engagement of MMC consultants to assist clients with their development of the processes. So I think it's just a point to watch out for when the new SBS NHS comes out next year.
But again, perhaps we can feed that into those happy hours that Sue referred to as well and draw attention to that. And I know we've got a number of other themes that we'd like to share. So Teresa mentioned exit strategy. I'm afraid I need to develop an exit strategy for this wonderful session. Thanks very much, all 4 of you, Stephen, Nina, Teresa and Sue for joining us. Thanks Lovell Later Living and Faithful+Gould for your support and sponsorship. Please do join us for our late afternoon session where we're going to be looking at more around the strategic partnerships with care, kicking off with the president of ADAS, Stephen Chandler. No decision about care is made without a decision about housing. Really important. So again, thanks ever so much, and I really look forward to welcoming you back for a future session this week, or indeed for our happy hours in the spring. So thanks again, and have a good afternoon. Bye, everybody.